It was a quiet evening in a small suburban town. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Inside a modest two-bedroom house, an old woman named Margaret sat by the window. Her wrinkled hands held a faded photograph, the picture of her only son, Ethan. She ran her thumb over his smiling face and whispered softly, almost as if he could hear her through the distance. "I hope you're eating well, my boy." The room was silent except for the ticking of an old wall clock. Margaret's eyes glistened, but she quickly wiped away the tear before it could fall. She didn't like crying. Not because she wasn't sad, but because she was tired of crying for someone who had forgotten her. Ethan hadn't visited her in over 3 years. He used to call once in a while, but lately, even that had stopped. Every day she waited. She'd glance at her phone, hoping his name would appear on the screen. But it never did. She cooked his favorite meals sometimes, just to remind herself of the days when laughter filled the house. She'd make apple pie, the way he loved it, with extra cinnamon, and set the table for 2. Then she'd sit there, waiting, until the food went cold. The neighbors knew her as the quiet widow who always smiled, but none of them knew how heavy her heart really was. When people asked about her son, she always said, "He's doing great, very busy with work." It was easier to lie than to admit the truth, that her son had chosen the world over her. On one particularly cold night, Margaret sat alone with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The heater had broken down a week ago, but she didn't have enough money to fix it. She worked part-time at the local library, but her health was getting worse. Her hands trembled as she held her cup of tea, and her breathing had become shallow. Yet she never complained. She didn't want to burden anyone. As she sat there, a soft memory surfaced, the day Ethan left home for the city. She had hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes, while he smiled and promised to visit every weekend. "Don't worry, Mom," he said. "I'll make you proud." And he did, for a while. He got a good job, a fancy apartment, and new friends. But with success came distance. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became rare. Eventually, they stopped. She used to send him letters in the beginning. Handwritten ones. She'd tell him about the garden, about how she planted roses because he loved their smell. She'd tell him about the neighbors, the weather, her health. But after months without a reply, she stopped writing. The loneliness was her constant companion now. At night, she'd talk to her late husband's photo, telling him how much she missed Ethan. Sometimes she'd say, "You'd be proud of him, you know. He's doing well." But in her heart, she knew. She just wanted her son back, not the successful man the world saw, but the little boy who used to hold her hand and call her mommy. One morning, as Margaret got ready for work, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. It lasted only a few seconds, but it scared her. She sat on the edge of her bed, breathing heavily. "I'm fine," she whispered to herself. "Just tired, that's all." She didn't want to tell anyone. She didn't want to go to the hospital because there was no one to take her. At the library, she worked quietly, arranging books and helping children find their favorites. They liked her gentle smile. Sometimes she'd read them stories. She felt less lonely when they were around. But when she returned home to her empty house, the silence was almost unbearable. She'd look at her phone again, still nothing. Ethan, meanwhile, was living his dream life in the city. He had a high-paying job, a modern apartment, and a girlfriend, Emily, who worked in the same company. He rarely thought about his mother. Whenever Emily asked about her, he'd say, "She's fine, just lives a quiet life. There's not much to talk about." Deep down, though, there was a flicker of guilt. Sometimes when he saw old women on the street, holding grocery bags or waiting at bus stops, he'd feel a pinch in his chest, a whisper reminding him of his mother's face. But he'd brush it off, saying to himself, "I'll call her tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. One Sunday evening, as Ethan scrolled through social media, he saw a memory pop up, an old photo of him and his mom baking cookies in their tiny kitchen. He smiled at first, then sighed. Something about that picture made him uneasy. The warmth in her eyes, the way she looked at him, it was love in its purest form, and he hadn't seen it in years. He thought about calling her. He even opened his contacts. But then Emily walked in and said, "Hey, we're going to dinner with friends. Get ready." He locked his phone and said, "Coming." Back in her small house, Margaret sat by the window again, watching the rain pour down. Her body was weak, her heart slower, but she still waited. The streetlight outside flickered, and thunder rumbled in the distance. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, "Maybe tomorrow he'll remember me." Tomorrow never came for her either. As the night grew colder, the rain turned into a storm. Margaret's breathing became shallow, her chest tightening again. She tried to reach for her phone but couldn't. It slipped from her trembling hands and fell to the floor. Her body went still as the storm howled outside. When the morning came, the neighbor found her sitting by the window, peaceful, almost smiling, as if she was finally free from all the waiting. But far away, Ethan still didn't know. He woke up late that morning, checked his phone, and went on with his day, unaware that the woman who loved him more than anyone else was gone forever. The regret would come later, sharp, merciless, and too late to fix. 2 days passed before anyone realized what had happened. The librarian called the local authorities when Margaret didn't show up for work. She was never late, never absent without a call. When they entered her small home, the smell of rain still lingered in the air. The blanket was still wrapped around her shoulders, the cup of tea beside her half empty. Her phone was on the floor, its screen cracked. A missed call notification blinked weakly. It was from the library, the last attempt to reach her. The paramedic said she had passed peacefully in her sleep. Peacefully. The word felt wrong because her heart had carried so much pain for so long. They found her old journal on the table, beside the photograph of Ethan. The cover was worn out, pages yellowed, filled with her delicate handwriting. The last page read, "If only I could hear his voice one more time." The news reached Ethan 3 days later. He was in a meeting when his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello?" he said casually. A soft, kind voice answered, "Is this Mr. Ethan Brooks? I'm calling from the Maplewood Library. I'm so sorry to tell you this, but your mother passed away." The words didn't register at first. Ethan blinked, confused. "What do you mean? Passed away?" His voice cracked. The woman on the phone sighed. She died in her sleep 3 nights ago. The funeral was yesterday. We tried contacting you earlier, but the phone slipped from his hand. The room around him blurred. He couldn't hear the voices of his colleagues or the sound of his heart pounding in his chest. His mother was gone. Gone without him saying goodbye. Gone without hearing him say, "I love you." Emily found him sitting on the floor, pale and shaking. "Ethan, what happened?" she asked, kneeling beside him. His lips trembled. "My mom, she's gone." The next morning, he drove to his hometown, the road stretching endlessly through gray skies. Every mile felt heavier than the last. He hadn't been there in years, and now he was returning to a home that no longer held her warmth. When he reached the house, everything was just as he remembered, except emptier. The curtains still fluttered in the window, the smell of old books and lavender filled the air. But she wasn't there. Her shoes still stood by the door. Her glasses rested on the table. A faint hum of her presence lingered in every corner. He sat down on the couch and covered his face with his hands. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. The tears came like a storm, years of guilt, silence, and neglect crashing over him. After a while, he noticed a small notebook on the table. The journal. He hesitated before opening it, his hands trembling. The first page was dated 5 years ago. The handwriting was neat and soft. "My dear Ethan, you're probably busy at work. I didn't want to bother you, but today I missed you more than usual. I made your favorite pie again, just like when you were a boy. It didn't taste as good without your laughter in the kitchen. Maybe next weekend you'll visit." He turned the page. Each entry was a small piece of her heart. She wrote about simple things, the weather, the flowers she planted, the stray cat that visited her porch. But every few pages, her words carried the ache of longing. "Ethan didn't call today. Maybe he's tired. I hope he's eating properly. I wish I could pack him a lunch like I used to. I saw a mother and son walking by the park." She held his arm so proudly. It made me smile and cry at the same time. "I dreamt of your father last night. He told me to be patient, that one day you'd come back. I believe him." Ethan's tears blurred the ink on the pages. His mother's voice echoed in every word, every line, every breath she left behind. The pain was unbearable. He pressed the journal against his chest and whispered, "Why didn't I call you, Mom? Why didn't I come?" Then, near the end, he found a letter she had never sent. It was folded neatly, addressed to him. My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, I want you to know I was never angry. Life keeps us busy, and I know you had your dreams. I just wish you had shared them with me. The house is quiet without you. I talk to your father sometimes, telling him how proud I am of you. You've become everything we hoped you'd be. Just don't forget where you came from, my love. Don't forget who prayed for you when no one else did. With all my heart, Mom. By the time he finished reading, Ethan couldn't breathe. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. He stood up, walked to the window where she used to sit, and saw her chair. Still there, still facing the road, as if waiting for him to return. He knelt beside it, his tears falling freely. I'm here now, Mom, he whispered. I came back. I'm sorry it's too late. Outside, the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty house. Inside, a son finally felt the weight of his absence, and the unbearable truth that some goodbyes can never be spoken will show Ethan trying to make amends, visiting the people who knew his mother, and discovering how much she suffered in silence while still helping others. The next morning, Ethan stood in the quiet hallway of his mother's house, sunlight slipping through the lace curtains. Dust floated in the air like memories refusing to settle. He had barely slept. All night he had turned the pages of her journal, tracing every word she had written with trembling fingers. When he stepped outside, the small garden she had loved was overgrown. Dried flowers leaned toward the ground, wilted but still standing, stubbornly holding on. It reminded him of her strength, of how she kept living, waiting, hoping, even when he never came back. Across the street, Mrs. Palmer, the elderly neighbor, stood on her porch, her face full of quiet sadness. Ethan? She called softly. I thought that was you. He walked toward her, guilt tightening in his chest. Hello, Mrs. Palmer, he said, his voice low. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. Your mother was a good woman. She used to come over every evening with soup or tea. Even when her health started to fade, she never complained. Always had a smile on her face, always talking about you. Ethan swallowed hard. Did she ever say anything about me not visiting? Mrs. Palmer gave a faint, bittersweet smile. She missed you, dear. But she always said you were busy building your life. She was proud of you, even when her heart was breaking. Ethan looked down, his hands clenched into fists. I should have come back sooner. The old woman touched his arm gently. We all think there's more time, Ethan, until there isn't. He thanked her and continued walking through the town. Every street, every corner carried a piece of his childhood. The park where his mother used to take him to feed the birds, the bakery that still smelled like cinnamon rolls she used to buy for him. Everywhere he went, people remembered her, not just as a kind woman, but as someone who helped everyone without expecting anything in return. He met an old man sitting outside the hardware store. You're Margaret's boy, aren't you? He asked with a smile. Yes, Ethan said quietly. The man's expression softened. Your mom was something special. When my wife was sick, she came every day with food and comfort. Never asked for thanks, just said, we have to look out for each other. You should be proud, son. Ethan nodded, but his throat tightened again. Proud? He had left her alone. He hadn't even noticed how much she had done for others while he stayed away. Later that day, he visited the Maplewood Library, where she had worked for over 20 years. The librarian, a gentle woman in her 40s named Claire, recognized him immediately. You're Ethan, she said softly. Your mother talked about you all the time. He smiled faintly. I wish I'd been here to talk back. Claire led him to a small wooden table near the window. She sat here every morning, she said. Before work started, she'd write in her journal and read letters she never sent. Sometimes she'd hum while reading, like she was keeping herself company. On the desk was a photograph of his mother surrounded by stacks of books. She was smiling, that same warm, calm smile he remembered from his childhood. Under the photo was a note she had written years ago for the library staff. Books keep us alive when memories fade, and kindness keeps us human. Ethan touched the note gently, his eyes filling again. She always believed in kindness, he whispered. Claire nodded. She did. Even when she was sick, she refused to stop working. She said she wanted to keep giving something to the world, no matter how small. Sick? Ethan asked, looking up sharply. She was sick? Claire hesitated. She didn't tell you? No, Ethan said, his voice trembling. I didn't know. She had a weak heart, Claire said softly. The doctor told her to rest, but she wouldn't listen. She said if she stopped moving, she'd start remembering too much. The words hit him like a blow. All the time he thought she was fine, she was fighting alone. He had ignored her calls, her messages, her pain, all while she was quietly fading away. He left the library with tears streaming down his face. He walked through the rain-soaked streets, his shoes splashing through puddles, his breath shaking. Everything she had done, every act of love, every sacrifice, had gone unnoticed by him. That night, he sat by her grave for hours. The rain came again, just like the night she died. He didn't move. He didn't care. He placed the journal beside her tombstone and whispered, I know now, Mom. I know everything you went through. You deserved so much better than me. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating her name carved into stone. Margaret Brooks, a heart that loved beyond measure. He closed his eyes, his voice breaking as he spoke. You gave me everything, and I gave you silence. I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. The storm raged on, but in that moment, something inside him shifted. The man who had left home chasing success was gone. What remained was a son, broken, guilty, and determined to honor the mother he had lost too soon. Weeks passed after Ethan discovered the truth about his mother's illness, and still, he couldn't forgive himself. The guilt had become a constant companion. It walked beside him in the mornings, lingered in his silence at night. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw not the man he had become, but the boy who had turned away from the woman who loved him most. One morning, as he sat at his desk in his city apartment, surrounded by awards and certificates, he realized none of it mattered. The success he had built on ambition and ego felt empty now. His achievements looked meaningless against the quiet, unspoken sacrifices of his mother. He took a deep breath and picked up her journal again. Between the fading pages, one line stood out, written in her elegant, soft handwriting. If you ever lose your way, my son, remember, giving is the only thing that truly fills the heart. Those words echoed in his mind all day. That evening, he made a decision that would change everything. Ethan packed his bags, left the city behind, and returned to Maplewood, the town that held his mother's memories and his childhood. When he arrived, he went straight to the old library. Claire, the librarian, was surprised to see him. Ethan? She asked, smiling faintly. You came back again? Yes, he said. And this time, I'm staying. He explained his idea, a foundation in his mother's name to help single mothers and underprivileged children. My mother believed in giving without expecting anything, he said softly. I want to continue that. I want her kindness to live on. Claire's eyes filled with tears. She would be proud of you, Ethan, truly proud. The next few months were full of hard work. Ethan sold one of his city properties and invested everything into the Margaret Brooks Foundation. He renovated an old building beside the library, turning it into a community center with books, art, and evening classes for mothers struggling to support their children. On the day of the opening ceremony, the small town gathered to watch. The sign above the entrance read in golden letters, "For the mothers who give and the children who dream." Ethan stood before the crowd, nervous but sincere. My mother, he began, wasn't just the woman who raised me. She was my strength, my guide, and my home. I didn't see it when I should have. I thought success meant leaving everything behind. But now I understand, real success is when the people who loved you can say you made them proud. The audience applauded, many with tears in their eyes. Mrs. Palmer stood in the front row, holding a small bouquet of lilies, his mother's favorite flowers. Claire smiled from behind her, her hands clasped together with pride. After the speech, Ethan walked quietly to his mother's grave. He placed one of the lilies on the stone and whispered, "You were right, Mom. Giving really does fill the heart. I couldn't save you, but I promise your love won't fade." As the sun dipped behind the hills, a gentle breeze rustled the trees. For the first time in years, Ethan felt peace. The ache in his chest hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It no longer felt like guilt. It felt like purpose. Later that evening, he returned to the community center. Children were laughing, mothers were chatting, and the walls that once stood empty now echoed with warmth. A little boy ran up to him holding a drawing. "Mr. Ethan," he said, "I made this." "It's you and your mom." Ethan took the paper with a trembling smile. It was a stick figure drawing of a boy holding his mother's hand, both surrounded by a big red heart. He crouched down and said softly, "That's beautiful, kid. Never forget how lucky you are to have your mom." The boy grinned and ran off. Ethan looked around at the laughter, the life, the light, all of it born from one woman's kindness. He turned toward the window, where the evening sun cast golden rays across the room. For a moment, he could almost see her there, standing by the door, her smile calm and full of love, as if she were saying, "I told you you'd find your way," Ethan whispered. "I love you, Mom," and closed his eyes, letting the peace of her presence settle around him. Months passed, and the Margaret Brooks Foundation began to bloom like the garden his mother once kept. What started as a single community center in Maplewood slowly turned into a network of hope spreading across neighboring towns. Ethan poured every bit of his energy, time, and heart into it, not for recognition, but as a tribute to the woman who had given him everything. Every morning, he would arrive early, open the doors himself, and watch as the mothers and children filled the hall with laughter and life. Some came for help, some came to learn, and some simply came to belong. Each face reminded him of his mother's strength, her warmth, and her ability to make others feel seen. One afternoon, as he was organizing books in the reading corner, a woman named Sarah approached him. She was young, her eyes tired but kind. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. Before this place opened, I didn't know how I'd take care of my little girl. Now I have a job and she has a place to learn after school." Ethan smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing, that when someone else needs a hand, you'll remember how it felt to get one." She nodded with tears in her eyes. "I will." That night, Ethan sat alone in his office, staring at a photograph of his mother on the wall. It was from years ago. She was standing in their old garden, smiling despite the dirt on her hands. He whispered, "You see this, Mom? You're still helping people, even now," but deep inside, a quiet ache still lingered. Despite the foundation's success, despite the lives he had touched, Ethan knew there was one thing he still hadn't done: forgiven himself. One evening, he decided to visit Mrs. Palmer again. The old woman welcomed him warmly, setting a cup of tea in front of him. "You've done something remarkable, Ethan," she said with pride. "Your mother would be so proud." He shook his head slowly. "Sometimes I wonder if she's watching. If she can really forgive me for how I treated her?" Mrs. Palmer smiled faintly. "Oh, she forgave you long before you even asked. That's what mothers do. You think your guilt is punishment, but it's really love trying to find peace." Ethan looked down at his cup, his eyes wet. "Peace," he repeated quietly. "That's all I want now." "Then let her go," Mrs. Palmer said softly. "Let the pain turn into purpose. That's how you'll truly honor her." The next day, Ethan held a special event at the foundation, the Day of Giving, dedicated to his mother's memory. The hall was decorated with her favorite flowers, white lilies, and filled with stories of mothers who had found strength through the foundation. As Ethan stood on stage, surrounded by laughter and gratitude, he finally felt something shift within him. For the first time in years, the heaviness in his chest began to lift. He said, "My mother once told me that love isn't about holding on. It's about giving time, forgiveness, and kindness, even when it hurts." Today, I finally understand her words. I thought I came here to fix my mistakes, but what I really found was her spirit, alive in every smile, every child, every act of kindness. The crowd stood and applauded, their eyes glistening with emotion. Somewhere deep in his heart, Ethan felt as if his mother's hand rested gently on his shoulder, warm and forgiving. That night, as he walked home under the soft light of the moon, he paused by the old bridge near the river, the same place where his mother used to bring him as a child to feed the ducks. He stood there silently for a long time, listening to the water. Feeling the breeze brush against his face, he closed his eyes and whispered, "I forgive myself, Mom, and I hope you know, I'll love you for the rest of my life." For the first time in forever, the tears that fell weren't heavy with guilt. They were soft, healing, like rain after a long drought. The foundation had become a symbol of hope in Maplewood, But as life always tests what we value most, a storm soon came. One morning, Ethan received news that a fire had broken out in one of the newly built shelters supported by the foundation. Though no lives were lost, the building was badly damaged. Donations began to slow, and people started to question whether Ethan's organization could survive such a setback. For a few days, he locked himself in his office, staring blankly at the charred photographs of the center that volunteers had brought back. The walls were blackened, the furniture destroyed, yet among the ashes lay a single object, a framed quote his mother used to keep on their kitchen wall. It read, "When life burns down your home, build again with your heart." He held the frame tightly, tears filling his eyes. That sentence was all he needed. The next morning, Ethan stood before the community, the same people who once cheered for him. His voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. "We've lost a building," he said, "but not our purpose. My mother used to tell me that a home isn't made of walls, it's made of love. If she were here, she'd remind us that what we started came from compassion, not comfort. So we'll rebuild, and this time, even stronger." The hall fell silent for a moment, and then applause erupted. One by one, people stood and offered help. Carpenters, students, retired workers, single mothers who had once received aid from the foundation. They all came together, united by the spirit his mother had left behind. Weeks passed, and under the open sky, the new shelter began to rise. Children painted the outer walls with bright colors, volunteers planted flowers in the garden, and on the day of the reopening, a golden plaque was unveiled at the entrance, "The Margaret Brooks Home, where love rebuilds." As Ethan stood before the plaque, the sun dipped low, casting a soft golden light on everything around him. For a brief moment, he could almost feel his mother beside him, her presence calm and familiar. He closed his eyes and whispered, "We did it, Mom. Together." Later that evening, he walked home with his young nephew, his sister's son, who looked up at him and asked, "Uncle Ethan, do you think Grandma can see us from heaven?" Ethan smiled, his eyes warm and peaceful. "Yes, kiddo, and I think she's smiling right now." The boy tilted his head curiously. "What do you think she's saying?" Ethan looked up at the sky where the first stars were starting to appear. "She's saying she's proud of us, and that love never really leaves, it just changes where it lives." As they continued walking, the streetlights flickered on, glowing softly like a path of memories leading home. For the first time in years, Ethan felt whole again. The guilt that had haunted him was gone, replaced by something far more powerful: peace. When he reached home, he lit a candle by his mother's old photograph and whispered, "Rest now, Mom. Your son finally learned what love truly means." And as the candlelight danced gently across the room, it felt as though her smile shimmered through the frame, tender, forgiving, eternal. The story of Margaret Brooks didn't end with her death. It lived on in every hand that reached out, every heart that healed, and every soul that remembered her kindness. Her legacy was no longer a memory. It was a movement, alive through her son. And though Ethan knew time would move on, one truth would forever remain carved in his heart. Love never dies. It just finds new ways to keep us alive.